Hello, everyone. My name is Matthias Davidson. I work for the developer success team here at monday.com. And with us is my colleague Dipro in this webinar. I am super excited to share this update and webinar with you, since this is a very big update and a very big deal. Today, we're going to talk about workflow blocks and the new feature that comes with them. And for that, we are going to be briefly reviewing recipes, triggers, actions, and then finish with how to use these workflow blocks in the automation center, which is the big feature. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A section in Zoom, and we will be answering the questions at the end of the webinar. So feel free to just write them down in the Q&A section whenever you want. Okay, let's begin. So what is exactly a recipe? When we want to automate flows to make our day-to-day more simple and to save time and energy, we can create a combination of triggers and actions so that whenever a specific event occurs, it sets an action in motion. For example, we can make a flow that sends an email to someone when that person is assigned to an item. Or we can change an item's group when a status column changes to something. A recipe would be a combination of a trigger or triggers and actions, where the trigger is an event which calls the action, and the action is whatever happens because the trigger happened first. Okay, let's see how this works. I made this board for this webinar. We have a new ad project. We're making an ad, and we have 3 different groups. We have the current tasks, we have the done tasks, and we have a special group for when we have an issue with a task. We have the name of the tasks, the assignee, the status, so how we're doing on that specific task, the priority, the deadline, and a text column we're going to use in just a little bit. Okay, we're going to be seeing how these recipes work. If we go to the automation center right here, we can see that we have tons of recipes that are built in Monday and that we can use just as they are. So we can choose any of these recipes and add them to our boards. Let's start with something very simple. Let's say this is my project. I'm in charge of it, and I want to be notified when stuff changes. So let's say that when here, this would be a trigger, and this would be the action. So when the status column changes to working on it, so we start doing something for a task, I want to be notified. And I want a notification to say we started with and the name of the task. And we're going to notify me. Okay, let's create this automation. Great, it's in our automations. And now, whenever I set something to working on it, what's going to happen is that I'm going to get notified up here. This can take just a few seconds sometimes. There we go. And just like that, I got notified of a status change in my board. So I just used an automation that was built in Monday and that you don't actually need to do much for, like you just can use them the way they are. We can use multiple different triggers and actions. So you can choose the trigger you want and the action you want to create your own recipes. So you can make something like when a status changes, then send an email to, in this case, me, Matthias Davidson. You can also do something like when an item is created, then assign the creator of that item as the person. So it will be the assignee. You can also do something like when a column changes, specific column changes, then create an update with a specific text. But this gets more interesting when you use many different triggers and actions at the same time. So you can make something more juicy, like when an item is created and only if the person assigned to it is me in this case, and only if the status is done, then you're going to notify me and create an update with some specific text. So you can use multiple triggers and multiple actions at the same time. So we have the triggers that are built into Monday that you can use just as they are, just like when some date arrives, or when a column changes, or when a person is assigned to an item. And of course, if we have the built-in triggers, we have the built-in actions. These are actions that you can use from the automation center just as they are. They're ready to go. So you can use built-in actions just like notify someone or move an item to a group. And we have many, many more. Okay, let's take a look at this. And we're going to make one right now. I'm going to make an automation. So let's set this off. Let's add a new automation. Let's create a custom automation. And we're going to be using the group we have for the problems. So this group right here, Houston, we have a problem. We're going to be using it. So let's create a custom automation that when status changes to stuck, so we don't know what to do, and only if the priority of that item is super important, then we're going to move this item to the group Houston, we have a problem. And why not? Let's notify me. We have a problem with this task. Okay, 2 triggers, 2 actions. Let's create this automation. This is on. And now let's go for this task, filming the ad. This is super important. And when I change this to stuck, what's going to happen is that this item right here should come all the way to this group. This may take just a few seconds sometime. And after this gets over here, I'm going to get notified about the item changing the group. This sometimes take, okay, there we go. Sometimes takes just a few seconds. So this changed the group to Houston, we have a problem. And what's going to happen now is that I should get notified that we have a problem with the task called film. Let's check if it's there. Not yet. Let's just give it a few more seconds. It will get there. Let's check this out and notify, yes. This is kind of like when you want your dog to do the tricks he knows, and he always does it, but when you have visitors, he doesn't. Happens sometimes. Okay, there we go. The notification, we have a problem with film. So with the same automation, I changed the group of this item and I sent a notification. Great, let's get this back here. Working on it, amazing. Let's go back to our slideshow. So, workflow blocks. Workflow blocks are here to make the apps more flexible to users. So before these blocks, users had to use entire recipes made in the app just as they were. But now they can choose to employ a trigger or an action made inside an app and combine it with any other block in the automation center. So they can create the recipe of their choice and we eliminate the need for the app to have the specific recipe the user requires. In this case, or actually in any case, a workflow block will be either a trigger or an action. So let's say you have a specific flow in mind, but there is no trigger like the one you need, or no action like the one you need, at least not in the built-in triggers and actions. So you now can make your own triggers and actions to customize your automations so that they adapt to your needs. That's pretty cool. So any custom triggers will be for events that are not native triggers in our platform or built-in triggers. So you can make a trigger that gets triggered when a lead is created in your CRM, or when someone buys something in your other platform. A custom trigger will have some characteristics. It will have a name to be identified. It will have, or it can have, input and output fields. The input fields are pieces of information that your trigger needs in order to work. And your output fields work kind of like an API between your trigger and your action. So let's say in my trigger, I am selecting a specific board for something to happen to it, and I will send that information to my action so that it knows which board to apply the action to. You will also have a sentence, kind of like, let's say, when a status changes to something, or when this event happens. And finally, you will have a subscribe and unsubscribe URL that will let your server know when someone adds this custom trigger to a board and when someone deletes this trigger from a board. And of course, if we have the custom triggers, we also have the custom actions. This is for actions that are not native to our platform, such as, let's say, when something happens, and then the action would be create an invoice and email it, or update a lead in a CRM. It can be whatever you want it to be. So in a custom action, we will have a name to identify it. It can have input fields. It will have a sentence like create a lead in my CRM, and it will have a run URL. The run URL will be called when the trigger gets triggered, so that you can set your action in motion. You can even do something like call an API so that when something happens Monday, something gets updated on another platform. Okay, let's check custom triggers and custom actions out. For this, we're going to go to the developer section. We're going to create an app. Let's make it yellow. And let's call it add project app. And save it. Amazing. Now let's go to auth and choose the scopes we're going to use. In this case, let's check boards read and boards write. Great. Now we're going to create the feature. This is an integration. And we're going to create it from scratch. Amazing. Now, if you see here, you will notice the workflow blocks tab. And we're going to create a custom trigger. So what we're going to do here is set a name. Let's say when something happens in my other platform. This will kind of look like the sentence. You can write here whatever you want to write. We're not going to use any input fields or output fields for this particular trigger. Let's just use the same for the sentence when something happens in my other platform. And then we're going to use the subscribe URL and unsubscribe URL. I have this ng rock running right here. and let's use it. Subscribe and unsubscribe. Let's check it one more time just in case. Subscribe, that's good, and unsubscribe, that's great. We're going to leave this for the end. We're going to create the trigger, and we're going to create a recipe using that trigger. So we have trigger and action. We're going to select the trigger, and when something happens in my art platform, we're going to, let's say, create an item. Let's create the recipe, and if we go to our recipes, we can see it's created right here. Now let's go to the app. Let's set this version to live. Amazing, and let's install it. Okay, looks great. Just, yep. Let's go to our board. And now we're going to the integrations center, and we're going to look for our integration, which is right here. And we can see the recipe we made just now. We are going to add it to the board, but first I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. When we add this to the board, what will happen is that, in this case, I'll just take this off. I have the trigger right here that is going to be receiving a payload from Monday when someone adds this custom trigger to their boards. And in this payload, I'm going to receive the webhook URL. The webhook URL is a URL I'm going to be sending a request to when I want the trigger to be triggered. So let's run this node trigger.js. Okay, it's running. So when I add this to my board, let's just create a new item. Very simple one, new item assigned to myself. And when I add this to my board, I can see the webhook URL right here. So this is the URL I'm going to use to trigger the trigger. I'm going to use Postman for this, just to simulate. I'm going to be sending an empty trigger because we don't have any output or input fields. I'm going to use the URL here. And for the authorization header, I'm going to use the sign-in secret in my app. For that, I'm going to go to developers. I'm going to go to my app, and you can see your sign-in secret right here. Let's copy that, and let's go back to Postman and use it as a value. Great. Now let's go back to the board. That looks great. And let's set this on motion. What's going to happen here is that I'm going to be sending this request to this webhook URL. And then, as you can see here, when something happens in my art platform, I'm going to create an item. The create an item part is a built-in action. Okay, let's try it out. As you can see, we just created this new item assigned to me, obviously, with the request from outside of Monday. That's the custom trigger. Let's erase this. Great. And now let's make a custom action. I'm going to go back to the developers section and to the app. Let's make a new version so that we can make a new workflow block. Let's go to the integration, workflow blocks, and let's create an action. What I'm going to be doing here with this action is populating the text column in my board. I don't know if you remember, but we had a text column that was empty in every item. So this will be populating the text column. For this, we're going to use a built-in trigger that says create an item. This has some output fields that we're going to use here. We're going to use the board ID from the trigger. And we're going to be using the item ID from the trigger as well. Great. So the sentence should be something like, populate the text column of the created item. We're going to use the very same URL /action, and we're going to create this. Amazing. Now, if we go to the recipes, we're going to create a new one that uses the built-in item created trigger, and then we're going to use the action we just built. So when an item is created, populate the text column of the created item. Let's create this. And if we go to the recipes, we can see a recipe right here. Now let's go back here. Let's promote this to live, the apps version. Amazing. Let's go back to our board. And this is the text column that is going to be populated. And I'm going to show you what I did here. Let's go action right here. Amazing. And what I'm going to do here is simply using a mutation, simple one, that populates the text column. I'm just hard coding the ID here because I know what it is. And I'm sending this text into that column. This is text sent by the custom action. What we're going to be using is the input fields for my mutation to know where it should change the text column. So we're going to use the board ID and the item ID that come from trigger. And we're going to be using the short-lived token that we get from the trigger that we decode actually from the payload, okay? For the authorization header, okay? Amazing. This is going to be coming in JWT and you have to decode it and just get the short-lived token. So this is running right here. Let's go back. Let's look for this. Let's turn this off. Let's add a new integration, look for the app. Now we see the new recipe. Let's add this to the board. Amazing. And what should happen now is if I create an item, then the text column should be populated with the text I have right here. Okay, great. Let's try it out. Let's make merchandising. This can also take just a few seconds. And what we're going to see here is the input fields and the short-lived token. And then what we're going to see is this text column being populated by this text right here. This is text sent by the custom action. Again, this can take just a few seconds. There we go. This is the board ID. This is the item ID we're passing right here. This is a short-lived token that we're using for the authorization header. And here is the text that was populated by our action. This column was populated by this mutation right here. From the built-in trigger, create an item. When an item is created, then we're using the action we created. Amazing. So now we know how to build a custom trigger and a custom action, and we were using them from the integrations center using the recipes as they came from the app. And that is good. That is actually great. But now what you can do is use these workflow blocks, either triggers or actions, in your automation center. So you can combine it with anything else. You can combine, let's say, a trigger that is in an app with any action that is either built in or in the app or in other apps. So you can combine them together. So can your workflow block be used in the custom recipe builder, aka the automation center? Yes, it can, unless you are using dynamic mapping, unless you have dependencies, or unless you have two fields of the same type as the trigger output fields. So most of the workflow blocks, I'm guessing, will work if will work. The only ones that won't work are the ones that use mapping dependencies or two fields of the same type as trigger output fields. So that's amazing, but how do we use it? How do we actually use our workflow block in the automation center, where you have to create your block? You have to enable it at the end of the configuration at the bottom. That's the part that I said we were going to take a look at in just a few minutes. You have to enable it right here, and then you just go to your automation center and use it. It will be listed with all the other triggers and actions. That easy? Well, yeah, actually it is. Let's try it out. Let's go back to the app. Let's make a new version so we can make some changes. That's amazing. And let's go to our blocks and let's try this one. So the action, we're going to enable it so that it is visible in the automation center. We're going to update the action. That's great. Now let's go back to the app and let's go to the versions and promote this to live. Okay, looks great. Let's refresh just in case so that we don't have to wait for some seconds. And let's go back to the board. And now we're not using the integration center as we did before. We're using the automation center right here. Let's turn this off and create a new automation. Now let's create a custom automation that when an item is created, and then let's look for our action in this list. Just a second, was the yellow one? Okay, let me just do something really quickly. We're going to go back and try make a new version and promoting. Actually, I'm going to go back to the workflow block. Let's just try something. Enable it again. Great. And let's promote this to live. Okay, that's good. Let's refresh this board. And we're going to try again, going to the automation center right here. We're going to create a new automation that when an item is created, we're going to look for our, here we go, sorry about that. And we're going to use this action so we can create the flow we want using a built-in trigger and our custom action in the automation center. So we don't have to go to the integration center. We just, we can do it from the automation center. So our automation is that when an item is created, we are going to populate the text column of the created item. It is the same as we did before, but before it was a recipe that was already made, and now we build it ourselves. So let's make some more merge. And here we go. The text was populated in this column when we created the item, just as the automation recipe we made said. So this is a very big deal. If you think about it, you can actually build pretty much whatever you want. And when you make your apps, you can make some workflow blocks that work with the recipes you make, but that will also be useful for your users if they want to make some other flows that you didn't think of or that are more specific for them. If you have any other questions in the future, just email us. We will be happy to help you with them. If you have any flows you don't know if are possible or anything at all, we're here for you. Thank you guys very much for being here today. It's really important for us. I think I speak from everyone here to say, be safe. This is a very tricky time. So be safe, have a great Christmas, Merry Christmas, have a Happy New Year, and just take care of yourselves and your people. Thank you again very much. It was my pleasure to be here with you, and happy holidays. Bye.